Hi everyone. In this video we're going to be taking a look at what we were going to cover this week for week 4 Memorial Day week in class. Some of these concepts you'll be asked to apply to your adversary room or week 3 assignment that we talked about last week. So to get this started, this particular concept you're probably not going to use within the first person game, and that is going to be the use of Cinemachine. So as of right now, where we left off last week, we had this character controller moving around. We had this one enemy that we had alternating between waypoints, and another enemy that just kind of followed us around throughout the scene. And we were able to just basically kind of try to lose him, and he would avoid certain obstacles in the scene. We also had these other triggers here that would send us to different areas. So if I go into this block here, I come out over here. Anyway, so what I want to do is, this is really difficult to see in our game view, so we need some sort of game camera. And you could program the camera just like we did in the first person game. But in this particular video, we're going to look at a newer feature in Unity. It's not super new, but it's one of the newer features in Unity. And it's something called Cinemachine. And Cinemachine is an automated camera that can do some pretty powerful things. One of the powerful things that it can do out of the box is be a character camera for a 3D scene, which is great. You could also have it so that it blends between multiple cameras inside of your scene. You could use it to do some pretty sophisticated camera work within your games. Like, so say you had a game like the original God of War series that kind of followed the character and would pan in and out during different cutscenes and that sort of thing. You could do that using this Cinemachine camera. And it has a timeline editor that is similar to like a video editing software that you can work with. But in this particular example, we're going to be using it as the camera for our character in our scene. So to get that started, we're going to have to import a package for this. So I'm going to go up to the window here, and I'm going to pull down, and I'm going to go to the package manager. So I'm in the window pull down. And you can see all of the packages that right now I have it set to all packages, but I can go to packages in project, and we use this for Text Mesh Pro, for example. But you're going to want to go to all packages, and let's see here. I'm going to type in Cinemachine, and it should come up there. And there it is, Cinemachine. Now, just like with all packages, there are different versions that you can go back to. But this version that's here should be pretty well up to date for this version of Unity that we're working in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this package for Cinemachine into my project. And I'm just going to pause that while it's completing. Okay, now that the package has been downloaded, I should be able to select Import into Project. It'll import the necessary assets into the project. And it looks like it has been updated. Now you can't see it on my screen because it is cut off, but it should add a Cinemachine pull-down menu to the top of the screen here. I'll click on it, you can see it here. And there are a whole bunch of different cameras that you can look through, and I would definitely encourage you to go online and look at the different types of cameras you can create using Cinemachine. But the one we're going to use in this example is the virtual camera. So I've created the virtual camera within the scene, and you can see it's labeled as CM VCAM1, and you can have multiples of these cameras inside of your scene. But for our specific example, we're just going to use one. So I'm going to call this virtual camera. And from here, what I'm going to do is start setting this up. So there's a lot of different parameters that are collapsed here that we're going to get into some of these. Don't worry, you don't have to know all of them to be able to use this. You just have to know the basics. But you know, if you want to do other things with this, I would definitely encourage you to check out the help menus and that sort of thing for these things. But the main ones that we're going to need here are this follow and look at, right? So we can set this up to follow the player, and we can also set this to look at the player as well. So I'm going to grab our rigid body player, which we created here, and I'm going to drag it into this node here. And I'm also going to tell the camera to look at that character as well. And you can see now this virtual camera is looking at our character inside of the scene. Now I'm going to pull up this camera here and have it aim out here. And let's see here. So if you turn this switch on here, this checkbox here, it'll turn on the game window guides, and it'll basically give you the safe area for the activation of the Cinemachine. So as this character begins to move, it's just basically going to follow him based off of these guides. But I'm going to shut them off for now, and I'll show you in just a second how those work. So if I hit the play button and I start moving around, you can see it starts to follow our character, right? But as you can quickly see, the issue is the camera is constantly rotating around in the direction that we're moving in for our character. So we're going to switch this up a bit so that our character basically stays in the middle of the screen and the camera isn't constantly floating around. So what we can do to start editing this, and one of the things I should mention here, is if we select the main camera, you'll see that it has this icon on it now. And what that means is it's got a new component called the Cinemachine brain. And the Cinemachine brain is basically what is telling this camera to be controlled throughout the scene. All right, so I'm going to jump back to the virtual camera, okay? And I'm going to open up body here. And what we're going to do is change this to framing transposer. So if I hit the play button now, what should happen is it should just always be framing the character inside of the scene. It still rotates, but it doesn't give us that hard rotation that we were getting earlier. Okay, so it's basically just kind of lightly following our player and always keeping the player inside the frame. Another thing we can do is change that aim so that the aim is a little less, a little bit more intuitive when we're moving our player around in our scene. So right now we have it set to composer. What we're going to do is we're going to set it to do nothing so that it doesn't aim at all. So now if I hit play and I start moving around in our scene, it basically just follows our character throughout the scene. Pretty cool, right? So it's like a third person kind of character that just kind of moves around throughout the scene. And there's that one guy that just kind of follows us around. All right, so I'm going to exit out of play mode here. And now that I have this set up, let's look at some of the features that we have in Cinemachine. So if I open up the window guides, you'll see that it gives kind of like this safe area that shows the area that the gameplay is going to be focused on inside of our scene. And I think I'm also going to actually come around here and kind of pull the camera away a bit. So I'm going to rotate around and grab this in this axis and pull the camera away from the player some. So I need to do that on the main camera. And it's not letting me move it. So what you have to do, that's right, if it's a frame transposer, you can't just move the camera around in the scene at this point. You can rotate it, so I could change the rotation here. But the rules have to be set within the body. So if we head into the body, if I want to do something like increase the camera distance away to give us more distance, I can increase it with that value there. Now when I hit the play mode button, you'll see that I'm able to see more of the field here. Okay, so also involved with this is some dampening that you can do with these cameras. So we can actually make it so that the camera doesn't hard follow the player throughout the scene. So we could make it so that the player has to move a certain amount of distance before the camera starts to follow. Now this is a little bit of a tricky thing to work with here. You see these guides here, so these are the guides inside of our scene. If you click and drag in this direction, you can change the positioning of the camera, right? If I click to and drag to the right, I'm just going to back that up by hitting Control Z. Now, that's if I click and drag to the right. If I click this blue line and drag to the left, you'll see that the line begins to split apart. Okay. Same thing if I click and drag upward, you'll see that the line begins to split apart in the other direction, and this little box will appear here inside of the scene. Now, what this box does is when this yellow dot gets to the edges of this box, that's when the camera will start to follow our player. So let's check it out. We'll leave the guides on and hit play. And I'll move up, and you'll see I'm moving, and the camera moves slightly, but it doesn't begin to follow the player until I move out of that box. And then it tries to get the player back inside of that box, and it will only stop moving once the player is back inside of that box. So you can create some dampening effects for your camera using this, this guide view here. So if I wanted to, I can make this shorter. Oops, grab this in the wrong direction here. I want to grab the guide and make it a little bit shorter, and maybe make these a little bit wider apart. You'll see here, I move left and right, camera doesn't move, right? But if I move up, it starts to follow us. So it allows you to create some interesting cinematic effects just with like a simple free look camera that we're moving around in our scene, right? So I can kind of keep the action centered on the screen if I'm in like a combat mode versus if I am trying to run away and dodge the enemy here. So now that we've got this camera working inside of our scene, we're going to take a look at some other things that we can do to be able to pause the game and bring up menus and that type of thing. So make sure you save the scene, and I'll see you in the next video.